Before we begin, viewer discretion is strongly encouraged. The following is for educational and entertainment reasons only. This is the verbatim federal courtroom testimony of the Sean Diddy Combs trial, as published by Inner City Press. What is on the classified film that caused Sean Diddy Combs' breakdown in open court? Why did a high-ranking Homeland Security agent appear as a surprise witness with evidence so sensitive that armed federal officers have surrounded the courthouse? And what ritual practices were allegedly captured on this recording that prompted 3 jurors to seek counseling after viewing it in chambers in a federal courtroom where Sean Diddy Combs is facing serious charges? An unusual scenario occurred today when Special Agent Marcus Daniels of the Homeland Security's Trafficking and Criminal Enterprise Division entered the stand, exposing the existence of video evidence previously unknown to the defense. This wasn't simply another witness. This was a federal agent with Level 8 security clearance presenting important materials, so the judge first ordered all electronic devices removed from the courtroom before testimony could begin. Add to Daniel's description of the origins of this video, which was purportedly discovered during a raid on an overseas data center related to Diddy's business associate, and the normally composed music mogul visibly collapsed for the first time since his arrest, shattering his carefully maintained facade. He lunged at the agent, his voice breaking as he pleaded, "You cannot show that, please. It was not intended to be filmed." The outburst drew swift action from court security, but what happened next surprised even veteran court reporters. The judge interrupted the proceedings and Diddy's urgent pleadings with an extraordinary statement. "This court will review the evidence in question in private before deciding whether it is admissible. What I've been told about its contents suggests that exceptional actions may be required. But what precisely was captured in this recording that caused one of entertainment's most influential figures to cry out in desperation? Why was it labeled as national security protocols instead of ordinary evidentiary procedures? And what did Agent Daniels mean when he described it as evidence of ritualistic acts that contradicted any known religious or cultural tradition? This isn't your typical celebrity trial reveal. It's a moment that could reveal activities so unsettling that federal officials are seeing it as a national security issue. The complete story. Raw Unfiltered begins with a data center raid in the Cayman Islands and leads to evidence that may forever alter our understanding of power, influence, and what some people will do to keep both. If you haven't already, please like this video and subscribe to remain up to date on the newest developments in this unusual case. I'm standing outside the Manhattan Federal Courthouse, where an enormous security presence has turned the normally bustling judicial complex into something resembling a military roadblock. Homeland Security trucks line the perimeter, with agents in tactical gear stationed at each entry. Court officials are undertaking increased inspections, including electronic device sweeps, which go far beyond standard security standards. The atmosphere in courtroom 24B changed abruptly this morning. What started as a typical day in Sean Diddy Combs' ongoing trial turned into a pivotal moment. U.S. Attorney Elena Morales announced a surprise witness, Special Agent Marcus Daniels from the Department of Homeland Security. The gallery exploded into whispers. Diddy, who had been reasonably calm throughout the process, visibly tensed at the announcement. His lead attorney quickly asked for a sidebar, which the judge granted. After 5 minutes of heated debate, the court continued with the judge making an unusual pronouncement. Judge William Harrison stated that due to the sensitivity of this testimony, all electronic devices must be surrendered before Agent Daniels takes the stand. Court personnel will collect and return these items at the end of today's session. This exceptional security step paved the way for what was to come. As court officials gathered phones and other devices, armed federal agents positioned themselves near the exits. The level of security suggested something well beyond ordinary evidence in a criminal case, even one involving a well-known defendant. Agent Daniels came by a side entry rather than the normal witness door, escorted by 2 extra agents who carried a safe suitcase chained to one of their wrists. Tall, with a military bearing, and the calm temperament of someone used to high-pressure conditions. Daniels was sworn in immediately to the judge, rather than having his credentials read aloud for the record. Another odd method. Diddy leaned forward, examining the agent with unmistakable seriousness. Daniels's attorneys were similarly nervous, exchanging glances and notes as he entered the stand. The gallery, now empty of the customary tapping of reporters' devices, sat in extraordinary silence, the air dense with anticipation. Special Agent Daniels, the prosecutor, began. "Could you please describe your participation in the defendant investigation?" Sean Combs. Daniels said, "I lead the Special Acquisitions Team within the Homeland Secure Trafficking and Criminal Enterprise Division." His voice was measured and authoritative. "My team became involved after specific digital files were discovered during a multi-agency investigation in the Cayman Islands in February of this year." The prosecutor nodded and explained what was uncovered during the operation that was relevant to the current case. During the execution of a warrant on a data center, purportedly used by many criminal organizations for secure storage, we located a partitioned server registered to a shell firm, which was ultimately linked back to one of Mr. Combs's business colleagues. This server held encrypted files that, when decrypted, provided video footage of extreme relevance to national security. At this point, Diddy's composure began to shatter significantly. His attorney placed a restraining hand on his arm, but the music mogul's eyes remained fixated on Agent Daniels, expressing terror and incredulity. Noting Diddy's reaction, the judge interrupted the proceedings to remind everyone about proper courtroom behavior. This little delay only added to the stress as Agent Daniels proceeded to explain exactly what had been discovered on that encrypted server. "To understand the significance of what we discovered," Agent Daniels said, after the judge's reminder, "I need to provide some context for our ongoing inquiries." He added that Homeland Security has been monitoring odd patterns of private flight travel and security-conscious communications among some entertainment industry leaders since 2019. These trends first appeared to be compatible with high-level drug trafficking organizations, but as the inquiry progressed, agents began to fear something possibly more serious. "We discovered a reoccurring incident," Daniels testified. "These events, which took place about 4 times a year at rotating private locations, required extensive security measures such as signal jammer technology, counter-surveillance processes, and screening procedures that went above and beyond what we generally find in organized crime activities." The prosecutor approached holding a document. "Your Honor, I would like to enter Government Exhibits 247. The history of these gatherings, together with the related travel information, was exhibited. It revealed a 7-year pattern of private flights to remote spots around the world, always with the same core group of 12 to 15 people, and rotating guests who appeared to be young aspiring artists or models. Mr. Combs appears to have attended 26 out of the 28 documented gatherings," Agent Daniels remarked. "We were able to recover through electronic communication. He appears to have been one of the main organizers." Diddy's counsel objected, claiming that attending private meetings was not criminal and that the government was attempting to infer dark overtones from regular celebrity behavior. The judge overruled, but advised the prosecution to establish relevance swiftly. Agent Daniels then detailed how the investigation escalated in January 2025, when a confidential informant, who had purportedly attended one of these gatherings, provided information that changed the course of the inquiry. "We updated our methodology in response to this informant comment," Daniels testified. "What had started as a suspected trafficking investigation had evolved into aspects that triggered national security processes under Executive Order 1003, all of which involved threats to essential infrastructure and significant population segments." This imprecise but frightening comment elicited whispers in the courtroom. The judge requested silence while the prosecutor continued. "Agent Daniels, what exactly did you discover on the encrypted server that is linked to this case?" The computer contained a number of video files that documented what could only be described as ritual gatherings. Daniels responded, his professional tone remaining unwavering despite the horrible stuff he described. These were not religious events in any established tradition. They had participants, including Mr. Combs, engage in activity that looked to be meant to elicit extreme psychological states in chosen attendees. The agent described how the videos progressed from seemingly benign meditation or breathing exercises to something far more concerning, with participants guided through experiences that appeared to be designed to break down psychological resistance and create intense emotional dependency. What makes these videos so relevant? Daniels went on to say that some people who appear in them later signed contracts with Mr. Combs' business organizations on terms that our financial analysts have identified as particularly exploitative. At this stage, Diddy whispered frantically to his lawyer, who asked a temporary pause. The judge refused the request and instructed the prosecutor to continue. Agent Daniels, does the government have video evidence that directly implicates the defendant in criminal activities during these gatherings? Daniels nodded solemnly. Yes. One of the discovered files is a 72-pack of AUT. Settle a 2-minute video from September 23, 1420. This video, shot in a private compound in Morocco, shows Mr. Combs not only participating in, but also directing actions that our behavioral scientists believe are a sophisticated form of psychological conditioning, commensurate with known control tactics. The agent then recounted how the video was discovered buried behind many layers of encryption on a server that was intentionally designed to be undetectable. The unusual lengths used to conceal this content indicated an understanding of its problematic nature. During my 15 years with Homeland Security, Daniels finished, I have never seen evidence that so clearly demonstrates a systematic approach to psychological manipulation for exploitation. This is not speculative. The film depicts the process from start to finish, with Mr. Combs clearly identified as the key facilitator. As the testimony progressed, Diddy's attitude shifted from concern to panic. The consequences were clear. The government was not merely presenting isolated claims but proof of a long-running, meticulously camouflaged plot centered on him. The government has requested permission to broadcast a brief, redacted section of the video seized from the Cayman Island server, according to the prosecutor, sparking a quick protest from Diddy's defense team. Your Honor, his attorney argued that we had no opportunity to analyze the supposed evidence. This ambush violates my client's entitlement to due process, which the judge briefly weighed before answering. The court will first go over the materials in chambers, with one person from each legal team present. The jury will be excused during the review. As the jury was escorted out, an unexpected scene occurred. Federal agents brought in a standalone viewing system, which is a secure, non-networked gadget developed exclusively for sensitive information. This was not the typical practice for handling criminal evidence. It was the type of protocol used for national security affairs. For the record, the judge stated, this evaluation will decide not just admissibility, but also the security protocols that must be followed. Should the court consider this evidence appropriate for presentation? Did he lose his composure as he realized what was about to happen? He stood abruptly and addressed the agent immediately. You can't display that, he murmured, shattering the formal stillness of the courtroom. That wasn't supposed to be recorded. You don't know what you're dealing with. Court officials approached him quickly, but he continued to speak, tumbling out with growing desperation. Those ceremonies are private and protected. You are breaching generations-old sacred practices. The judge slammed his gavel. Control yourself, Mr. Combs, or you will be removed from this courtroom. Diddy's attorney yanked him back into his seat, whispering passionately. But the damage had been done. Everyone present heard his outburst, in which he acknowledged the existence of rights that he had previously denied knowledge of. The judge, prosecutors, and members from both legal teams went to chambers, leaving Diddy seated with his remaining counsel, visibly upset. The spectators remained motionless, with no whispered remark as the gravity of the situation fell over the courtroom. 43 minutes later, the judge returned alone, his expression serious. Rather than immediately bringing the jury back, he addressed the court directly. After reviewing a portion of the supplied evidence, this court reaches the following decision. The item in question includes sensitive information, necessitating extreme protection. He described an extraordinary set of restrictions. The courtroom would be closed to all but essential personnel during any evidence viewing. Transcripts of that portion of the proceedings would not be accessible immediately. Following their viewing of the material, jurors would be offered therapy resources. Furthermore, the judge proceeded. I am establishing a gag order that prohibits any discussion of the particular content of this evidence outside of this courtroom. This is not about safeguarding the defendant's privacy. It is about preventing potential public harm caused by mimicry or misinterpretation of the depicted acts. This startling statement, implying that the information was not only unlawful, but potentially hazardous in its depiction, caused a ripple of tension in the courtroom. When the jury returned, they discovered a changed atmosphere, unclean, unmoving. His previous confidence had vanished, and the prosecution team appeared gloomy. While federal agents took positions around the room, the court will now hear testimony on Government Exhibits 301. The judge announced before the agent proceeded, I must inform everyone present that the information you are about to hear is subject to the previously specified gag order. Agent Daniels returned to the stand and began to discuss the contents of the film without revealing it, a strange compromise that further added to the ominous tenor of the evidence. The video begins in what looks to be a ceremonial setting. Daniels testified that 12 people, including Mr. Combs, are seated in a circle arrangement. The room contains symbols that our analysts have identified as integrating aspects from several esoteric traditions, albeit in an arrangement that is not consistent with any acknowledged discipline. He stated how participants, originally dressed in white, engaged in breathing exercises given by Diddy, who could be heard telling them to open themselves to the current and ready to receive guidance from beyond the veil. Daniels continued speaking about 17 minutes into the recording. Mr. Combs introduces the chosen vessels, 3 persons who appeared disoriented, possibly as a result of substances administered prior to the taping. Diddy made a second, more frantic attempt to interrupt by rising from his seat, despite his attorney's restraining hand. "Stop this," he shouted. "You have no rights. You do not grasp what we are doing. It stands for elevation or ascension. These are sacred practices." The judge quickly called for order. "Mr. Combs, this is your final warning. One more outburst and you will be escorted out of this courtroom," as court police approached him again, pulling him back to his seat. Agent Daniels went on to describe how the film demonstrated a transition from ceremonial activities to what he called systematic psychological breakdown of the chosen vessels. The clinical terminology could not totally whitewash the unpleasant essence of what the film appeared to reveal. Several jurors visibly recoiled as Daniels recounted tactics that included sensory manipulation, chemical delivery, sleep deprivation, and psychological pressure used over several hours. The video concludes. Daniels said that Mr. Combs instructed the principal participants to seal the covenant with the now fully compliant vessels. The last chapters depict the signing of what are eventually revealed as exclusive contracts with Mr. Combs's numerous business companies. As the testimony completed, the courtroom became silent. The systematic explanation provided a picture of a carefully organized system, one that appeared to generate psychological dependency and cooperation in victims, who would subsequently be tied by ostensibly legitimate commercial relationships. The prosecutor posed a final question. Agent Daniels, in your professional view, what was the goal of the activities documented in this video? Daniels stared straight at Diddy as he responded about creating, leveraging, psychological, emotional, and ultimately legal control over individuals with potential commercial worth in the entertainment industry. In my expertise studying human trafficking and exploitation, this is one of the most sophisticated forms of coercion I've ever seen. Following a brief recess, the prosecution tried to prove that the video was part of a larger pattern that spanned years. Agent Daniels returned to the stand, accompanied by Dr. Rebecca Chen, a forensic psychologist who specializes in coercive control and exploitation. Agent Daniels. The prosecutor began by stating how many comparable movies had been found from the encrypted server. 23 separate recordings. Daniels responded. From August 2017 to December 2024, they demonstrate a clear progression of tactics, getting increasingly advanced over time. The agent claimed that the movies depicted a polished system perfected via repetition. Early recordings revealed less planned activity and uneven results. Later recordings, including one from Morocco, showed a highly developed system that appeared to be geared to maximize psychological impact on the target individuals. Dr. Chen then gave expert context, outlining the psychological dynamics employed in these recordings, without revealing any specific content that would breach the judge's gag order. She described how the tactics shown in the movies incorporated sensory overload, trauma bonding, dissociative induction, and manipulated group dynamics. What makes this system so effective? Dr. Chen stated that it is a slow trend. Targets are not merely abducted or coerced. Rather, they are taken through a sequence of escalating events, each of which makes the next appear more acceptable. It's a sort of psychological boiling of the frog, in which the subjects are unaware of how profoundly they are being controlled until they are severely weakened. The prosecution next provided financial documents demonstrating how individuals mentioned in the video later signed contracts with Diddy's different company organizations, contracts that legal experts evaluated and concluded to be extremely one-sided. The financial records reveal a clear story. Agent Daniels elaborated. Individuals who appear in these videos as selected vessels almost always sign contracts within 30 days of the recorded rituals. These contracts often handed Mr. Combs's organizations between 80% and 95% of all future earnings, creative control, and substantial rights over the individual's name and likeness. More worrisome was evidence that these same people frequently had severe personality changes following their participation in these events. Social media posts, interviews, and declarations from friends and family detailed transitions from independent, ambitious artists to docile, seemingly dependent individuals whose public statements frequently mirrored Diddy-related themes. The prosecution then linked these psychological operations to physical control measures, travel records, security logs, and technological surveillance. Evidence revealed that many of these people were thereafter kept under intense monitoring. Their travels and communications were meticulously documented, often limiting what we could see. Agent Daniels said that it is not simply psychological manipulation for a single contractual event. The establishment of ongoing control connections, in many situations, meets the precise definition of human trafficking under federal statutes. Specifically, using force, deception, or coercion to get labor or services. Throughout the testimony, Diddy was unusually silent, occasionally whispering to his counsel but otherwise sitting immobile with an enigmatic countenance. The systematic form of the data given appears to have quelled his previous terror and replaced it with a gloomy resignation. The prosecutor then presented phone records from after the raid on the Cayman Islands data center. Diddy made 17 calls within 48 hours to various individuals who had taken part in the taped ceremony, which investigators viewed as attempts to limit the possible damage from the finding. Agent Daniels claimed that they weren't casual check-ins, citing incomplete recordings gathered through legal monitoring. They were specific warnings to be silent regarding the sacred labor, as well as reminders of oaths signed at the ceremonies. This pattern of evidence elevated what could have been disregarded as eccentric private behavior to something far more sinister. A calculated, long-term operation aimed at identifying, manipulating, and ultimately controlling individuals for financial and other purposes. As this section of testimony concluded, the prosecution had established not only that disturbing events occurred, but also that they were part of a sophisticated system with dirty at its core, a system that had evolved and refined itself over time, implying both intention and awareness of its exploitative nature. The prosecution's case progressed gradually until they presented their most strong evidence, testimony, from someone who had experienced the rights depicted in the videos. Alicia Morris, a former artist who was briefly signed to one of Diddy's subsidiary labels in 2019, joined the stand at age 27. She appeared apprehensive but resolute as she was sworn in, her hands quivering as she adjusted the microphone. Ms. Morris, the prosecutor, began gently. "Can you tell the court how you first met the defendant, Sean Combs?" Morris described being approached at a music event in Atlanta, where she had performed original songs. A talent scout claiming to work for Diddy's organization had invited her to a special secret audition that could result in a recording deal. I was 22 and struggling to break into the industry. Morris testified, "When someone related to Diddy expresses interest, you do not question it. You simply feel glad for the opportunity." She recalled being flown to a secluded estate south of Miami for a creative retreat alongside other potential artists. Initially, everything appeared professional, with adequate lodgings, scheduled events centered on creative growth, and the presence of respectable industry executives. "The first 2 days were fantastic," Morris continued. "There were songwriting classes, vocal coaching, and even financial literacy training. It seemed like a once-in-a-lifetime opportunity for professional advancement." On the third day, however, the mood shifted. Morris and 4 other budding artists were informed that they had been chosen for special coaching straight from Diddy. She testified that this is when things began to get bizarre. "We were separated from the others and ordered to prepare our jars using a series of purifying techniques. It began with fasting, hour-long water meditation sessions, and breathing exercises that left you dizzy and bewildered." Morris stated how, after 36 hours of preparations, she and the others were led to a ceremonial location similar to the one described in Agent Daniel's testimony. What ensued was a meticulously planned event that included sensory manipulation, substance administration without informed consent, and psychological coercion. They termed it a elevation ceremony. Morris explained that her voice became wobbly. However, there was nothing elevating about it. It was breaking you down to the point that you couldn't distinguish what was genuine. You couldn't trust your own thoughts or emotions. She detailed how participants were led through events tailored to elicit strong emotional responses. Fear, euphoria, perplexity, and gratitude all occur in quick succession. A sequence that medical specialists have seen can make people extremely vulnerable to suggestion and external control. At some point, "I'm not sure how many hours Mr. Combs spent telling us we'd been chosen to join the family, but that family required complete allegiance and obedience," Morris claimed. "He said we needed to demonstrate our dedication by giving up our old selves and following his leadership in everything." Morris then explained the ceremony's finale, which involved being presented with contracts while still in an altered state of consciousness. She recalls being told that signing was the final stage in your transformation, and that refusing would imply rejecting the path that had been revealed to you. "I remember signing," she remarked gently. "I remember feeling as if I had no option, not because someone was physically forcing me, but because, after everything they'd done to tear down my resistance, saying no seemed impossible." Morris described the subsequent 18 months as captivity disguised as opportunity, during which she lived in housing controlled by Diddy's organization, recorded music on which she had no creative input, and was subjected to reinforcement sessions that renewed the psychological conditioning established during the initial ceremony. "Anytime I questioned something or attempted to assert my independence," Morris testified that he will be reminded of his family commitments and scheduled for another elevation. "You eventually cease resisting. Complying is simpler than facing." More of these sessions. When asked how she eventually broke free, Morris's coolness gave way to tears. She said that a family medical issue had forced her to return home. She began to understand the manipulation and sought assistance after being free of the continual surveillance and influence, as well as the support of family members who observed the changes in her. She concluded that it required months of therapy to identify what had happened to me, and years to reconstruct my sense of self. The contracts were finally annulled due to my mental state at the time of signing, but the psychological damage did not go away with the legal documents. The courtroom remained hushed as Morris ended her statement, save for the sound of her soft sobbing. The clinical findings provided earlier had an evident human impact, as evidenced by the traumatized young woman on the witness stand. Diddy, who had kept iron control during the whole of her testimony, now expressed emotion, not remorse, but wrath. He whispered. Furious, he confronted his attorney, who tried unsuccessfully to calm him down. Morris walked down from the witness stand. Diddy jumped to his feet and pointed at her. "You're lying," he shouted. You beg to be a part of everyone's elevation. They all crave the power it provides. The outburst verified what the prosecution had been carefully establishing. These were not random acts of excess, but rather a calculated operation with a purposeful objective, one in which Diddy not only engaged, but also believed in and supported. The judge quickly called for order as court officers surrounded him. Recognizing the harm caused by this outburst, his attorney requested an immediate recess, which the judge allowed with apparent reluctance. As Diddy was carried out of court, the impact of Morris's testimony lingered, giving clinical evidence a human face and translating abstract descriptions of exploitation into the actual reality of a young lady whose ambitions had been turned into weapons of control. When court reopened the next morning, the mood was fraught with anxiety. Additional security measures were established overnight, with federal agents stationed around the courtroom. The judge looked sad when he called the session. He announced, "To order before we proceed. I must confront yesterday's happenings." The defendant's reaction was highly improper and perhaps frightening to the witness. Any similar behavior will result in the defendant's expulsion from the proceedings. Diddy, now composed but visibly somber, nodded in agreement. His legal staff had been dramatically overhauled, with a new head attorney in charge, a crisis management specialist with experience managing high-profile matters involving public people. The prosecution called their final witness in this case. Dr. Malcolm Rivera, a former member of Diddy's inner circle who took part in several ceremonies before leaving in 2022. Unlike Morris, who had been the subject of the manipulation, Rivera had contributed to the system's implementation. Dr. Rivera, the prosecutor, started. "Can you outline your involvement in Mr. Combs' organization from 2017 to 2022? Rivera, a distinguished-looking man in his 50s, spoke with the controlled cadence of an academic. "I was hired initially as a wellness consultant. I have a background in psychology and alternative spiritual traditions. Mr. Combs exhibited an interest in creating what he called transformative moments for the artist he mentored. He described how what began as fairly standard meditation and mindfulness practices grew into something significantly more controlling. Over time, Mr. Combs became increasingly interested in strategies that could induce deep psychological openness in people. He explicitly inquired about strategies for resetting someone's boundaries and fostering genuine loyalty. Rivera noted his growing unease as the behaviors became more intense and the objective appeared to be predatory. I realized that what we were calling elevation was actually a sophisticated type of psychological manipulation. The ceremonies were intentionally designed to make attendees vulnerable to persuasion and suggestion. The most devastating testimony came from Rivera, who revealed Diddy's precise intentions. He frequently discussed the power of knowing someone's thinking and how, after you've torn them down and rebuilt them in your image, they'll give you everything, including their skill, devotion, and money. Rivera then supplied critical context for the video evidence, stating that the tapes were purposefully recorded as a means of insurance. Mr. Combs requested that all ceremonies be documented, but participants were never made aware of this. He referred to these recordings as his forever leverage, evidence that could be utilized to compel obedience through shame or legal repercussions if anyone attempted to defy or speak out. This testimony directly linked the troubling ceremonial activities to an explicit purpose to dominate and exploit, changing what the defense had tried to portray as unorthodox spiritual practices into premeditated exploitation for financial and personal gain. Diddy's composure eroded as Rivera proceeded. When Rivera detailed specific orders Diddy had issued about targeting particularly vulnerable artists, the carefully kept facade of a misunderstood spiritual leader crumbled into evident wrath. Diddy could no longer control himself. "You were a part of it all," he exclaimed, rising from his seat. "Despite his attorney's attempts to stop him, you assisted in designing the rituals. You claimed they were elevating people. Now you pretend to be an innocent spectator." The judge quickly called for order, but complied. He continued, now addressing the court directly. "Your Honor, you do not understand what is going on here. These practices are protected. They are spiritual traditions that date back generations in the industry. Everyone. Is this a question for anyone who has achieved true success? His lawyer attempted valiantly to hush him, but Diddy was unstoppable. His meticulously prepared defense strategy is unraveling with every syllable. The rituals work, he maintained, his voice rising. They produce stars and success. Every famous musician has experienced some version of this. It's how you distinguish the exceptional from the commonplace. The judge slammed his gavel frequently. Mr. Combs, you will be seated immediately or removed from the courtroom. Federal officers approached as Diddy's attorney forcibly dragged him back into his seat, whispering urgently in his ear. The harm. However, he was already done with his outburst. Diddy had virtually verified the prosecution's main contention that the ceremonies were purposefully designed to lure vulnerable people for professional exploitation when ordered, was eventually restored. Rivera continued his testimony, explaining how he eventually quit the organization after witnessing the terrible psychological damage done on participants. I couldn't reconcile my professional ethics with what we were doing, he said. These were not consensual spiritual activities, but rather premeditated strategies of control. The prosecution then posed the question that brought the testimony to a sad end. Dr. Rivera, in your professional judgment, what was the real aim of these ceremonies and the film documentation of them? Rivera responded directly to Diddy, attempting to develop psychological dependence that could be used for financial benefit and collect compromising material that would prevent victims from ever coming out. It was not advancement. It was servitude, masquerading as opportunity. The prosecution rested this section of their case once Rivera stepped down. The systematic nature of the exploitation had been established by technological proof, expert testimony, victim impact, and now insider verification. What began as disturbing allegations had evolved into a complete picture of years of premeditated exploitation involving dozens of victims. Did he sit immobile? The weight? Despite the evidence plainly crushing down on him, his shouts not only failed to disturb the proceedings, but also unintentionally enhanced the prosecution's case. The image of the successful entrepreneur and mentor had been replaced by something much darker, a man who had systematically abused weakness for personal benefit and still believed in the goodness of his actions. The allegations in Agent Daniel's statement and the accompanying proof sent shockwaves well beyond the courtroom. While the media was unable to publish on the precise substance of the films due to the gag order, they did focus heavily on the larger ramifications of what had been revealed. Industry insiders began to come out with reports of similar mentorship practices across the entertainment industry, implying that Diddy's methods, while maybe extreme, constituted a dark progression of long-established patterns of control and exploitation. Veteran music journalists admitted that reports of initiation ceremonies had persisted for decades, but had been ignored as urban legends or exaggerations. Perhaps most significant was the impact on ongoing investigations. According to law enforcement authorities, at least 7 other high-profile entertainment individuals have been investigated for similar tactics based on the evidence given in Diddy's trial. Search warrants were executed across numerous jurisdictions, focusing on private compounds and data storage facilities associated with these persons. The psychological effect on the people was enormous. The testimony had forced a painful reevaluation of success. Narratives from the entertainment sector. How many meteoric rises to prominence, dramatic artistic makeovers, or abrupt personality changes in superstars may be explained not by inspiration or natural evolution, but by systematic psychological manipulation. Mental health practitioners noticed an increase in former entertainment industry employees seeking therapy for experiences similar to those detailed in the experiment. Support groups were developed expressly for survivors of industrial exploitation, providing forums for people to discuss tales that they had previously kept hidden due to fear or shame. Legal experts emphasized that the case could establish a new framework for comprehending exploitation in professional settings. The systematic nature of the manipulation mentioned in testimony, which included psychological tactics, substance administration, and contractual leverage, was questioned. The traditional legal concepts of consent and compulsion. According to legal scholar James Crawford, the significance of this case stems from the way it illustrates the gray area between formal physical coercion and real assent. The victims were not kidnapped or physically restrained, but the psychological techniques used effectively destroyed their ability to make significant choices. For the entertainment industry itself, the discovery sparked a reckoning. Major record labels, talent agencies, and production organizations have launched assessments of their mentorship procedures and contractual agreements. Industry associations set up hotlines for reporting suspicious conduct and created new rules for detecting potential exploitation. Veteran artists began to come up about their own experiences, with numerous high-profile musicians admitting to being subjected to similar, but less extreme, forms of manipulation early in their careers. These disclosures changed what may have been ignored as isolated events into the identification of a systematic issue. Legal experts projected that Diddy might face decades in prison if convicted based only on this portion of the evidence. Followed. Beyond the criminal proceedings. As former associates and victims came out, the number of civil actions increased. Emboldened by the evidence presented in court, his decades-long financial empire appeared to be falling in real time. Perhaps most telling was the reaction of people who had previously been close to Diddy. Within days after Agent Daniel's testimony, several longtime business associates and celebrity pals openly distanced themselves from the music tycoon. Social media accounts were cleaned of all associations, charitable foundations removed his name off their boards, and corporate sponsors severed ties with any entity associated with him. The encrypted films Diddy had manufactured to gain eternal influence over others had become the very evidence that may lead to his permanent ruin, an ironic reversal that prosecutors highlighted in their media announcements. What we have seen in this courtroom is more than just the exposé of one person's sins. U.S. Attorney Morales spoke to reporters outside the courthouse. It marks the start of a bigger reckoning with long-hidden exploitation mechanisms. This case has provided us with a framework for identifying and prosecuting similar activities wherever they may exist. The jurors who had seen sections of the video evidence in closed session had a strong personal connection. Following the screening, 3 jurors requested and received psychological counseling, with one being completely excused after her doctor presented papers indicating that continuing to serve would jeopardize her mental health. Mental health professionals unrelated to the case raised concern about the possibility of secondary trauma among those exposed to the evidence, which included court officials, attorneys, and even law enforcement agents involved in the processing of the information. When discussing trauma in the context of criminal proceedings, we frequently focus solely on the direct victims, according to Dr. Sarah Kaplan, a trauma specialist who analyzed the publicly available evidence. However, such material has the potential to cause severe psychological injury to individuals who are exposed to it as part of their professional tasks. The judge's decision to restrict access and provide counseling resources demonstrates a proper assessment of the hazards. As the trial progressed to other areas of Diddy's case, the disclosures regarding the ritual tapes stayed at the forefront of public conversation. Documentarians, investigative journalists, and academic scholars began to investigate the broader implications, focusing on how similar approaches may have affected entertainment business dynamics across generations. Former participants in Diddy's ceremonies experienced their own complicated consequences. While many were legally deemed victims, several went on to engage in similar activities with their own mentees, resulting in a problematic cycle of exploitation. This posed challenging problems concerning the distinction between victimization and complicity, which legal experts warned would be argued for years. Perhaps the most devastating impact, however, was on public perception. The carefully cultivated image of the entertainment industry as a meritocracy, where ability and hard effort decided success had been severely harmed. Instead, a more frightening notion emerged. Some of the most acclaimed success stories in entertainment may have been constructed on the foundations of deception, exploitation, and psychological control. As one cultural critic noted in a widely circulated critique, These facts prompt us to reassess the nature of influence and power in the creative sectors. If the path to achievement entails ritualized breaking of the will, can we honestly applaud the resulting work as authentic expression? What does it imply for audiences to have unintentionally eaten and applauded artistic work produced under such circumstances? For the broader public, the case had evolved from a celebrity scandal to something considerably more disturbing. A look into hidden systems of power and control that had produced the same society they devoured. The videos that Diddy had battled so hard to keep hidden not only exposed his own crimes, but also revealed practices that called into question fundamental notions about success, consent, and authenticity in American culture. At the conclusion of this phase of the trial, Judge Harrison made an unusual personal comment. Has a responsibility not only to hear the allegations before it, but also to guarantee that justice serves its larger purpose of preserving society. What we've seen in these processes implies that our legal definitions of exploitation may need to change to address more sophisticated types of psychological coercion. That technology has increased both power and documentation. The eventual consequence of these discoveries remains to be known. But one thing is certain. The entertainment industry following Diddy's conviction will never be the same. Agent Daniels took the stand and revealed the ritual videos that had been kept for so long. If you found this report useful, please like the video and subscribe to our channel for future coverage of this growing subject. The truth needs to be heard, and we're devoted to getting it to you.